Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Transformation in Times of Crisis Roundtable discussion. This session will be moderated by Phil First, the founder, Chief Executive Director, and Chief Analyst at HFS Research. Throughout the session, there will be interactive questions for the audience members to answer. To participate, please check out the polls tab on the top right of your screen. If you have any questions for our panel, please share it in the Q&A panel in the top right of your screen. We will then have your questions answered during the Q&A session towards the end of the program. Thank you again for joining us today. The session will begin now.
Thank you. I think I'm finally live. Sorry for the delay, everybody. And we're greeted by a lovely dog barking, so we're reminded of our current situation. Thank you very much. I can actually get to know who my colleagues are now by the sounds of their pets, but I think many of you also have the same experience. So I'm Phil First. I'm the CEO, founder of HFS Research. I've been asked to host this wonderful conversation today entitled Transformation in the Time of Crisis. And I've got some wonderful folks who've been assembled to join in this discussion today. And I just want everybody to do a very quick name, rank, and serial number intro. And I think let's start with certainly one of the more famous guys of the moment, who's now an author as well, Mr. Nitin Rakesh. Welcome.
Thank you, Phil. I'm glad to be here. Nitin Rakesh, CEO at Emphasis. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent, Nitin. Great to hear from you. Jerry Wind, great to have you on board. I know you're one of the influencers of Nitin's life. I think Nitin talks a lot about you and your background. Maybe you could quickly give us an overview of yourself and your background and your role with the discussion today.
Thanks, Phil. I'm the Lauder Professor Emeritus at the Wharton School. Currently engaged in writing, research, consulting, a variety of boards, and really enjoyed the opportunity to work the last 2.5 years with Nitin on this book.
Excellent. So, and we'll get more into the book shortly, but let's move to the next contestant today, Baroness Verma. Welcome, and maybe a little bit about yourself and your background and what you hope to contribute to today's discussion.
Thank you very much, Phil. It's a great honour to be part of this wonderful conversation. I'm a member of the House of Lords. I've been there since 2006. I have been a former minister, and I, from before my life in politics, was a businesswoman and remain a businesswoman.
That's wonderful. Welcome. And then Richard Ward. Good afternoon, Richard.
Thank you, Phil, and good afternoon. And Nitin, thank you for inviting me to join this august roundtable. A great pleasure to be here. I'm here because I'm in the insurance industry. I've been in the industry for the past 14, 15 years. Started as CEO of Lloyd's of London, and I'm now at Ardonna, which is a insurance broker, one of the largest independent insurance brokers in the UK.
Wonderful. Welcome, Richard. And last but not least, Trish Oxy. Welcome, Trish. Wonderful. I think she's a guest in the lobby if someone wants to let her in. There we go. Good. So just to get started, Nitin and Jerry recently published a book. What piqued my interest, with not just the fact that Nitin was involved, was the fact that when I studied a business studies degree, a technology degree back in the day, it's about 25 years ago now, my favorite marketing writer and thinker at the time was a guy called Philip Kotler, who I didn't realize was still knocking on. He's well into his 90s. He's in his 90s now, I believe. And it was great to see Philip join Nitin and Jerry for a book launch recently. But I often work by his buyer awareness principles, which maybe we can talk about that at some point today. But if anything that Nitin wished he'd written, anything that Philip Kotler wished he'd written, I'll read as well. So Nitin and Jerry have written a fantastic book called Transformation in the Times of Crisis, and they'll expand a bit on some of the core themes of that book, and we'll also give you guys a link if anyone wants to wants to get hold of a copy after today's session. So the details are there. And if you go to transformationintimesofcrisis.com, that must have been a widely available URL, then you'll find the book there and you can see more details on maybe how to download or buy a hard copy of the thing. So let's talk a little bit about change and what we've been going through when we talk about transformation. And we look over the last kind of 30 years plus of our industry of business operations and technology. We can see that we've changed how we deliver with more efficiency, effectiveness, and globality than ever before. We've gone through the days of centralized nearshoring and shared services. The offshore boom hit quite heavily around the 2000s and plus. Analog outsourcing, as we call it now, really enjoyed its boom after the turn of the century. And then with the impact of the 2008 recession, that was really the heyday of the big growth spurt of the Indian heritage service providers. And on came the cloud and what we now call basic digital, which is the ability to respond as quickly as you can to your customers using digital channels, online channels, mobile channels, what we call the omni-channel. And then came, I think, what we call as GBS, which is Global Business Services. And this was 90% of the Global 2000 have their operations run effectively by shared service, global business service delivery. And when 90% of these folks are working from home now, being judged by outcomes and the way of doing things, and I'll tell you very shortly that not a lot of them are going to go back to a shared service center. They're going to stay in a remote environment. In fact, I think Unilever was the latest company to come out and declare that they're now a remote working business. We're not going back to that world of heavy clusters of people in centers working together as much. They're going into a more distributed model. And we call this the one office. People call it different things, but ultimately we had our change agent. All we've been doing for the last 30 years is moving data around the company a bit more effectively. We've been running the same processes the same way, quickly, efficiently, but not differently. And if you want to get ahead in the market that we're evolving into, you need to put data at the core of your strategy of your business, which means that you need to design processes that are going to get you that data. You need to make sure those processes run in the cloud so you can automate them. And once you've automated your processes, you can then use all sorts of AI, ML tools, computer vision tools to get more self-learning developed, more remediation, and better data to make you smarter and sharper than your competitors. So what we've been given, whether we wanted it or not in the form of a pandemic, was the change agent to truly start to rethink how we do things. And while we've engaged in lots of exciting dialogue over the last 10 years in particular, at least what we've done is created a vision for how businesses should look when we go through a transformation. And right now we have a transformation. We're in the middle of it and we have to go ahead with it. And this is how we roll. Some data that we pulled off a big study at the end of last year, just to sort of emphasize 400 of the global 2000. Of this number, only 37% have said they're going to return to this office-based environment. The rest are considering more hybrid workforce opportunities for themselves. And of that, a big number is they've already committed to it, right? So unless you're servicing the 37% of companies who don't want to change and assuming that 37% is going to come out of COVID in great shape, don't do anything. Just wait, get vaccinated and go back to the way you were before. However, the world is shifting. We are going into a remote work environment. Things are different. And we'd love to hear a bit more from folks about how that's the case. Other things just to point out here from the same study, when we pulled out what the executives saw as the impact that's really holding them back from conducting their business for another year and a half, it's COVID-19. This is the game changer. This is the thing that's changing everything much faster than anything else, much faster than the role of capital markets and population migration, right? It's also social unrest and still disruption is now getting higher and higher on the list of impediments, geopolitical conflict. I mean, I've been involved in lots of arguments about, oh, we mustn't talk about politics on LinkedIn or something like that. And I'm like, well, I know, but when geopolitics is playing such an important role in technology decisions now and investments, you can't avoid it. You cannot avoid talking about politics in a business context. So the world is changing very much from the rules that we had in the past. Different industries are flourishing or are perishing or struggling to survive in the current environment. You can see here banking and financial services, they've got their last digital mile set for them now. I think for many of those organizations, they've been able to exploit people working online using different tools and tech, not wanting to use physical banking outlets anymore. That's been a big plus for them. They've done well in this pandemic economy. Healthcare, this is their game changer, right? Healthcare tech is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, our own healthcare practice has been booming, and we're looking to expand that at HFS. And then insurance and life sciences. Some of these businesses have continued to develop during time of pandemic, where I think we've seen real problems are in industries that are cyclical, that rely very much on physical purchases, physical lifestyle, like consumer products and retail. I mean, we were talking with one of the big British retailers, Tesco's, the other day, and while their online business is absolutely booming, their physical business is tanking. How do you balance those two? Are they going to go back to a heavy physical model in the future as a grocery store, or do people want to click and collect and get things delivered now? Everything is shifting. Everything is changing. Every industry will rebirth itself. I think, you could maybe design a new travel business coming off the back of this, which caters for the business traveler who travels less than they used to, but has different needs. So things are changing more than we've ever thought possible. So let's get maybe some views from. I can continue with some of the great data findings from the studies that we've done, but I'd also like to get some views from the folks who are joining us today. So maybe Richard Ward. I mean, you've come out of the insurance industry. You're working heavily there now. We've said the industry is experiencing more of a positive bounce than a negative bounce because of COVID. Could you tell us what it's a bit like from the inside? Is this a real transformative time for insurance? Are you trying things that are completely different for the business than you had previously?
That's an interesting question, Phil. Clearly, it's an opportunity for the industry, and the challenge for all of us is whether we actually take that opportunity. The risk when you look at these crises is when they come to an end, everyone reverts to what they were doing before. What we're trying to do in our business is not do that, is use the pandemic crisis as an opportunity to re-examine the way we engage with our customers, re-examine the way we engage with our staff, and see how we can build on that to come out with a better business at the end of it. I was struck by your slide 6, I think, where it had financial services and healthcare up in the top right, showing how they've improved their business during the pandemic, and insurance has remained roughly similar. Well, our opportunity is to take insurance up into the top right. And we're doing that through transforming the business. We're doing it through the use of technology. We're working with emphasis to see how we can apply digital technology to our processes to improve the engagement with our customers, free up our staff to do what they really need to do, which is actually talk to the customers, and take out those processes that you can effectively class as more administrative tasks that can be done more effectively by technology. And just to give you an example of how this is working, if you think of the Lloyd's market, where I started my career in insurance, that has been doing business the same way for 360 years. People gather in an underwriting room to actually transact business. They meet each other face to face. For the first time in its 360-year history, the underwriting room shut because of COVID-19 pandemic. Not even the Second World War shut the underwriting room. So the Lloyd's market, and we support the Lloyd's market as a broker, has had to think about how it responds to this challenge from the pandemic and how it embraces new ways of working. It is all about how we use technology to enhance the relationships with our customers, the trading opportunities with our customers, while supporting our staff.
Thank you, Richard. And just to add to that, I think it'd be great to hear from Baroness Verma, because we mentioned about working in government as well as working in business, and is it possible to separate the two now? I'd love your view on that, Baroness, if you could think a bit about, from the earlier days where business and politics were a nicely divided pair of conversations, as to what you're seeing today, particularly in the UK, which has gone through such a traumatic period, probably more tougher than other countries in terms of dealing with a pandemic, and businesses that do need to go through transformation. Thanks,
Phil, and it's a good opening starter question, because I think actually, if I go back to what you've said, that it's business and politics are more in hock with each other today. I don't think that's the case. I think it's always been the case. I think, however, what's really important now is how does business push government to do things differently? And I think the difficulty we've had, and the pandemic has opened up chasms and holes for us to see where we've actually never moved on from traditional models. And I think the fact that we've constantly kept a model that is so outdated, that is why countries like mine, the UK, is having to really work even harder to be able to put in place preparations to tackle and combat the impact of the pandemic, whilst countries like the emerging economies, who have had to deal with crises and develop strategies along the sort of decades, are faring better. So I think it is an opportunity. I agree with Richard. It's an opportunity for us all to have a reflection and a rethink. But I do think that there must be, behind all of this, a real commitment to a levelling up of ensuring that nobody now is left out of the discussion, regardless of where they fit in the sort of feeding pond of ideas.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Baroness. Really, I think I spend more time watching the news these days than the business news, for my own sanity, just to make my own decisions. So I'd also like to get to the, I think, kernel of the conversation a bit today as well, with Nitin and Jerry, is the book that they're publishing, and they published, and I'd like to hear a bit more from them about the principles of the book, and how we need to sort of think about transformation moving forward. So maybe Nitin, if you'd like to lead that off.
Never gets old, you forget to go off mute all the time. As you rightly pointed out,
there's always one.
Yeah, there's always one. As you rightly pointed out, Phil, I think this is a fairly, I would say, a tipping point moment that we went through over the last few months. I'm probably still in it. I think when we started writing the book, we saw a number of trends building up, to some sort of a major change. Think about the amount of change we've all embraced in just our own personal lives in the last 10 years, right? From the way we actually transact, even banking services, to the way we transact with retailers, to the way we think about communicating with one another. So I think a number of these trends were already underway, and I always like to remind people that we do business with, enterprises, business execs, that the number one disruptor in all of the last 10, 15 years has been the consumer. And while everybody says consumer is king, I think it's the customer driving that disruption because of the availability of everything on their fingertips, and the inability and the inflexibility that enterprises have had in adjusting to this new normal of all things being available digitally. What the crisis has shown us is that these trends got majorly accelerated because all of them hit a tipping point, and what used to be fashionable with what you called omni-channel. And I challenge C-suite execs now that omni-channel is actually old-fashioned. You don't need to be omni-channel. You need to be digital first, digital native, and in many cases digital only. So I think that was a huge, I would say, learning early in the crisis. And Jerry and I spent time. We were already writing about disruption and what enterprises need to do to architect their own disruption versus getting disrupted by digital vanguards. So I think for us, the biggest learning and the lesson was, well, this is exactly what was going on. This is a major accelerant. How can we devise a set of principles that anybody and everybody can use, from whether you're in business, you're in government, social service, and by the way, even your own personal life? How can you use these principles to apply change in a way that you make the crisis into an opportunity? And then, of course, the famous saying, never waste a good crisis. And the 8 principles are very well aligned. They go hand in hand. But the foundational of all that I just want to spend 30 seconds on is the shift in your mental models. And again, Phil, you showed some great data about what is likely to happen on the other side of the crisis. I think the fact that if you don't embrace the change and you don't adjust your thinking about how the mental, how you want to use the crisis, and if you assume that you're going to go back to the same way of doing business, and if it really it's a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, then none of the principles are going to work anyway. So I think, to me, the foundational element of all of these principles really was the first thing you need to do is to shift your mental model, and then of course you start thinking about how everything else fits in, comes into play together. And I'll let Jerry talk a little bit more about the rest of the principles. Jerry, over to you.
Thank you. So actually, what Nitin just did, he provided the first one, the first principle, which is the challenging the mental models. And then the second one, and most critical, is the changes in the consumer. We really talk about not only the consumer, but also the changes and the importance of the stakeholders, as we see a shift from the traditional shareholder orientation that drove so much of business to a stakeholder orientation. The other principles cover the area of the importance of speed, speeding up the digital transformation that companies started with, the need to reinvent the talent strategy, the need to try to speed the design of agility, adjacencies, and adaptability. How do you primarily implement this with a focus on experimentation, focusing on multiple time horizons, both the now, midterm and long term, and how do you balance a portfolio to capture all of them? And how do you basically design a new strategy using all of these, and what are the implications to your organizational architecture? But the key to the book is not only the 8 principles, but also by providing a lot of examples to inspire the readers to actually to do something. And our idea with the book was not only read and nod your head and say, yeah, we agree with the principles, we agree with the trend, but rather to start taking action, to say these changes that we see in the environment that Phil articulated before, and the principles that you suggest actually make sense. Let's experiment with them. Let's start designing a system to start experimenting with them and move forward. And we provide also a framework in the book of how to implement the principles. And to help doing it, we also suggest a set of tools that everyone can use to start implementing and experimenting with doing with. So we hope that this session will help intrigue you enough to try to look at the book, at the principles, and try to experiment and implement them, because only by implementing them we'll start actually getting the value from the book and the insight we hope we provide you with.
Thank you, Jerry. So thinking about then where we shift from here, I think one of the areas that we're looking at is how the market is reacting in terms of investments around technologies to drive a more impactful sort of work from anywhere type organization. We've got some data here to show that cybersecurity has dominated the increase in anticipated expenditure, followed by the cloud, core IT modernization, and we're seeing 5G emerge a lot in our studies as a technology that I think can potentially replace Bluetooth, and so not Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and some of these other technology that we become tired of, I think, during these remote times. So everything is shifting. Maybe Nitin, and when you look at the impact on your business and where you're seeing growth versus maybe shrinkage in markets, does this concur with what you're seeing a lot of in terms of what your clients are asking for?
The the themes are probably the ones that you highlighted. I think the issue isn't how to implement cybersecurity or how to implement things like cloud. I think the issue, or data, for example, I think those are obviously the big themes. The issue is a little bit more about how do you apply that transformation to the way you think about business, the way you think about engaging with the customer, the way you think about implementing changes in the way you run your business, so you're actually not only closer to the consumer, understand his needs to a point that you can actually start showcasing and offering products and services that are highly personalized. I think it's a journey. A lot of the themes you highlighted are absolutely the right conversations, but I think it goes beyond that, because what many of the enterprises that we are working with are looking for is that ability to actually make that business model shift in itself versus just adopting a tech. I think technology is a way to get there. I think what Jerry talked about earlier on, the fact that we've actually given behind every principle, there are well-researched, anywhere from 3 to 5 to 6 examples of companies that are actually using that principle and enabling technologies to drive it, right? Let me give you a very simple example. Think about the amount of personalization that you see in many of these digital vanguard businesses. You log on and they know, your needs, your preferences based on your history, to a point that they're actually able to predict and not just make recommendations, but they're actually now starting to create products and services. I mean, Netflix creates content based on their ability to know before they put $1 into content as to how many people are going to watch it, what the target audience is, and hence their success rate on content creation is an order of magnitude higher, about 4 times higher than the success rate that a traditional Hollywood studio would see in content creation. Like, that's the level of shift and the use of tech. But the biggest impact really comes in how do you implement that business model shift? How do you implement the shift in the way you think about engaging with every stakeholder?
Right. Interesting. Thank you for that, Nitin. And actually, Richard, I think while we've got you here, one of the things that we've noticed a lot of, we had a bunch of CIOs around a roundtable just recently on this, is everything the CIO is buying is pretty much in the cloud now. So they don't have to put in a ton of investment in terms of developing out solutions as much or coding solutions as much as they used to. A lot of this is like, how scalable and agile are they? And how does this align with what my business leaders need, the CFO, the COO, the CHRO? How do we develop that? And they've all come out and said, we need to develop more business context behind what our business clients need to be successful, to embrace a work at home model, which is rampant, embrace a digital model, which is the way they operate today. So they've had to develop more business context. And at the same time, the business leaders, they need to understand how to scale up and down faster, how to move to new markets faster, how to get access to solutions faster. So they need to understand database schema. They need to understand a bit more about, solutions that might be low code, which is certainly not no code, right? And how do they develop a bit of IT context? So this really feels like the first time in about 4 or 5 decades where we've got this true coming together between technology and business. We call it digital fluency, where it's about understanding each other. And then if you've got to build and rebuild processes to get to the data you need, that is a partnership between business and technology that we haven't seen for many years. I mean, someone joked that they rolled SAP out in 1983 and the company has basically not moved since. It's just been sort of bogged down in that way of thinking and that type of process. So Richard, as I said, from your perspective in an insurance business, do you feel that there's this crossover between tech and business that we've never seen before, and that's a core part of this transformation?
It is happening, Phil. It hasn't happened, but it's in the process of happening. And it is absolutely being triggered by this pandemic. And what it's making people think about is not just collecting data, it's actually translating data into insight that can then help you with your customer. So data for data's sake, we've all got massive data lakes all over the place and they sit there, no one accesses them, and we learn nothing from them. So it's how we get insight into what our customers are doing to provide a better service to our customers. That for me is absolutely key, and the insurance industry is starting on that journey. And it has been triggered by the pandemic. Insurance is very much a relationship business built on one-to-one relationships, nurtured over many years. You're suddenly thrown out of your office into your home environment where you're juggling home working with homeschooling, with probably looking after vulnerable parents or something like that. It's a real challenge that you're having to juggle with all these issues. And that is making people stop and think of how they interact with the workplace and how they interact with their clients. And technology, digital transformation is critical to that. And if we don't do it, we'll just go back to our offices whenever the lockdown is over and pick up from where we left off. And that is a wasted opportunity. I think, as Nitin said at the opening, never waste a good crisis. We can attribute that comment to a great leader we had in British history, but that's the reality. Let's not let a good crisis go to waste here, because there is an opportunity to truly transform the businesses, build on it in partnership with tech companies such as we're doing with Emphasis, and really take the business forward.
Excellent. No, it's great to hear. And yeah, it's good that one of those quotes came from a great leader. Another quote I really liked is "Hope is not a strategy." But then when I found out that came from Rudy Giuliani, I had to stop using it as much. And that was a joke. So as we look at this evolution around talent, and maybe Baroness Verma, I know you wanted to talk a bit more about what we're seeing in terms of talent needs and changes that are necessary here. How do you think the role of government needs to align with the talent that our businesses need to be successful as we emerge from this? We talk about more digital fluency, more context, maybe, is this something that we have to address at the core of our education system? In that, are we producing talent that are aligned for the workplace with the system we have, or do things need to really shift?
Thanks, Phil. Can I just follow on from something Richard said a moment ago, though?
Sure,
and it's really important because it comes into the context of where we want to go. And, Richard said something about the fact that we need to have insight. It's the usage of insight. It also, I'm afraid, and I slightly worry, because we're using insight means we then start to shape how people think that they want things. And my worry about this whole pandemic and the crisis it's leaving and the trail of challenges it's going to leave is that the levelling up agenda that we all constantly talk about, the fact that we want to reduce the divides in society, in inequalities, and on all of those fronts, will never get addressed unless we look at this crisis as being a leveller upper. Because the pandemic has demonstrated that it doesn't take your social status as how it's going to take you out. But what it has demonstrated is that the poorest of the poor, the ones that have the fewest choices, will still remain outside of our going forward unless we make them a big integral part of government thinking. And whilst the large majority of businesses have tried to adapt through either furlough schemes or going online, many people will still have to be able to work and operate in some sort of traditional setting. And I'm really mindful that whilst we understand that there has got to be a different approach, and I fully endorse that, because I think we've spoken far too long about the sort of development of the 20th century, superimposing it on the 21st century, and then expecting the digital platforms to try and navigate themselves around it. My only worry over and over again is that we are doing things still in the remit of big business coming along and being able to shift, and smaller players not having the ability for several reasons, amongst them finance, funding, and people skills. So I think behind all of this, there needs to be, and it addresses it perfectly in principle 2 of this book. How do we reimagine and reinvent the approach we have to our customers and equally to our stakeholders? And in my view, the stakeholders are every single person in that consumer chain, not just those that make the decisions at the top, so are able to implement technology, and those at the end who have to accept whatever is provided to them.
Yes, I think the attitude towards technology, I think, has changed a lot since before COVID and now, in terms of I think people realizing that if you don't get on this train, you're going to get left behind very, very quickly, and that means you need to find.
If I can just make one point to the point about talent and the fact that not every enterprise is in the same position to attract the same type of talent. I think there's something fundamental going on in the talent ecosystem as well, which is the whole, gig economy in talent and the opening up of the talent ecosystem, Uberization of talent. And I think we talked about that in our principle around talent as well. That to me is actually a very big fundamental reshaping of how people engaged with businesses and how businesses would find the right talent at the right time, at the right place, at the right price. So I think if you think about one of the big gifts of this platform economy also is the fact that you're now able to actually open up many parts of the value chain and the supply chains and have access to things you never had before. And I think that's the reason why, when we talk about, how you embrace some of these changes, you have to start embracing the internal mechanics of how you actually access that supply chain of talent included.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely think that's critical moving forward, and the need for companies to embrace this sort of cross-pollination of technology and business together is really driving a different way of viewing things and encouraging companies to learn on the job, right, and be a bit more out there with ideas. And Nitin, you're primarily your technology services business. You've got some, I think, BPO services as well. But are you seeing a real coming together from a delivery angle now? As when you talk to customers, it's not just sell them the type of solutions they were buying 2 or 3 years ago. Now it's throwing a lot of it out the window and starting to look at real business problems. And how do we address those? And how do you service them as a partner to make the client get smarter as well about how they operate? I mean, how is that shifting in terms of the actual relationship model and the depth of business logic and context that are getting built into the equation?
No, absolutely right, Phil. I think that's the heart of the change that we are not just hoping to drive, but we're actually driving with many of our large client relationships. And I talked about it earlier, which is the whole construct is not just about applying technology or using the cloud. It's actually about how does it impact my business outcome. So if you can't show changes in business metrics being impacted by some of these initiatives, and you can't show it in a matter of months, not years, then you're not doing something right. So I think the ability to link transformation agendas to business outcomes, the ability to bundle multiple different parts of the way you run your business together, whether it is technology, operations, customer engagement, using data, building new platforms that actually give you insights, using those insights in a way that you can actually impact business metrics. And I'll give you examples like, in the kind of work we're doing, for example, with Richard, we actually have the ability to we are building ability not only to be able to use data to derive those insights, but then how do you impact cross-sell percentages? How do you impact net promoter scores and customer satisfaction? Because you should be able to measure those and take that feedback loop back into your business. And let's not forget one biggest fundamental thing that is needed today. All of this is a massive change for both within the org and outside the org. Right? You need the ability to construct all this transformation alongside with change management and governance. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to keep control of those programs. So I think it's a coming together of many different things that we did in different silos, across many different years, over the past 20, 25 years. Now it's really time has come to actually bundle them all together and bring it all in a way that the business can start seeing the impact. And not forgetting the number one reason why there is pressure is because the person who owns the business, the CEO, and this is a boardroom and a C-suite conversation, they need to see that impact and that change on the business with agility, customer centricity, and of course, finding the money to do it.
Yeah, finding the money to do it. It's easier said than done, right? And
well, it's easy if you call emphasis.
I mean, I think a lot of what we're talking about there is what we were talking about this 10 years ago, but we didn't have that burning platform to change. And I think COVID has accelerated what was good and bad about businesses, right? So businesses that were failing are now going to fail a lot faster than, and ones that were actually quite well set up for a digital economy have gone from strength to strength. I mean, I'm actually heartened to see a lot of like restaurant owners have actually profited now, because a lot of people are eating from home and ordering food delivered from restaurants of their choice, and restaurants that could only get 20 tables in are now selling to maybe 50 to 100 a night. So if you really do adapt and get energized around the current economy you're in, you can actually be successful. And we have this conversation with even people in companies like yours, Nitin, where salespeople are like, "Oh, I'm just waiting till the days of the steak and wine are back and the golf, and I can get my deals done again." And I said, "Well, I don't think those days are coming back. Well, procurement's taken over now. Well, that means you've got to deal with procurement a lot more. You're going to have to get to know the names of their dogs and cats, right? The kids." So things have. There's a need for changing the way we do business that I think we've never really expected before. And I'll pick on Richard again, because he's been so eloquent with some of his experiences. Is your actual way of doing business changing? Do you feel it's the when you get up in the morning, the way you approach your job is different, the way you talk to people, the way you manage your time? Do you feel like it's very, very different now than it was?
Well, it certainly is at the moment, Phil, because my time exists of 1 hour time slots on video calls, which is not how I want to spend the rest of my life. And I'm of a generation where I wasn't born to live and sleep at work. I was born to go to work and come home away from work. And that in itself is a boundary that I think a lot of people are losing, that we need to think very carefully about the impact that is having on people's mental health and well-being. And I do worry about that. But to your point, how is it going to change the way we do business when we get out of the pandemic? I think it certainly enabled us to re-examine the way we interact with our customers. We're forced to do it at the moment on Teams and on Zoom calls. There is no other way to do it. We cannot jump on a plane to do our 1 hour meeting in New York with Nitin. Nitin and I have talked about this. We need to get together for a meeting. We haven't done it. At some point we will, but we will think a lot more carefully about the value of that meeting and what we actually get out of it. And hopefully it'll be a more enriched, better experience, because if we put more thought into it, recognizing this is not something we should be doing on a regular basis. So I think my businesses, they're going to rethink the way they engage with their customers on a true personal basis, where you need that personal interaction, have a beer or a glass of water with them to actually get to know the person, versus this type of relationship where you actually need to speak to people. And yes, you want to see their face, but you don't necessarily need to be in the same room as them to be able to have that interaction. So it's a separation between building personal relationships, which we will need to do, versus transacting with people, having face-to-face conversations to enable us to transact. So we will go to the steak restaurant at some point, but it certainly won't be as frequently as we used to, or the vegan restaurant. I should be recognise many different opportunities here, but the reality is those ways of doing things certainly will decline quite significantly.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, and I think we don't realise that we're getting used to this now. And I'm complaining about my 12 hours of continuous video conversations to my family and my colleagues like anything, because it's impossible to find productive time. It's a big change for the executives, where you've got to be more engaged on the calls because this is all we've got. And in the old days, you travel to do everything. You could fit your calls in around your business. So I think it's a big change in how we interact with people. And I'll just fess something up. I escaped the UK. I'm in Canada right now, where there's no. And I actually saw my in-laws last night for the first time in a year, and I had to give my mother-in-law a hug and my father-in-law a hug, and it was so weird just to have a physical contact again with people and stare at them and think, wow, this has been a long time. I'm more used to seeing you in Zoom or hovering 10 yards away from my front door with a loaf of bread. So I don't think we're realizing how much we've gone into this digital world. If we're actually used to this now. And it does have its good moments as well as its challenging moments. But yeah, it's about embracing reality. So we've got time for a couple of questions, and I've got a couple of excellent ones that have been contributed from our audience. One from gentleman Edward Mattingly for Baroness Verma. I don't know if you know each other or not, but anyway, he decided to explain who he was. And he agrees on the need for a true business partnership between business and tech. How hard this is, given how hard this is, what have you found that works to help break down the barriers to get the true dialogue underway towards a shared vision and plan. So breaking down these barriers to get the real dialogue underway. What are you thinking, and what are you experiencing really works here?
So I think it comes down to the points that Richard has just said. There is a clear need for relationships. There is a clear need that from the top of any organization that there is a belief that you can use technology and disruptors and not be frightened of them. I mean, I call myself a human disruptor all the time. And that's because I'm happy to challenge anything I see in front of me. But I think one thing's been clear, and I don't know, Edward, but thank you very much for the question, Edward. What I want to do is to be able to see this crisis be able to ensure that we're able to utilize real skills of people without them having to be excluded simply because they didn't fit a particular criterion on a CV, but we're able to, through the usage of technologies at their hands, so whether it's on gender, disability, ethnicity, are able to have the same opportunities. So I do see this as an opportunity. I do see as having the ability to change the whole landscape of how businesses operate. But I do think the will has got to come from the top, always. And I think at the end user is king. And the demands are, if they want to and are satisfied with how things have been through the crisis, they will demand more from those that have got to give it to them. So I think there is a great opportunity there. And I think potentially for me, people like me and people like Jerry and Nitin who have put it out there in the space, it's getting business leaders to pick up and see how they implement it in their organizations.
There is a perfect link to this point with the point that Nitin said before concerning the open talent and open innovation, which is a huge growth and requires companies actually to rethink their entire talent strategy and how do you mix internal talent and what type of talent you need internally when you have this amazing pools of talent globally, which in the US alone, the estimate is that about 1/3 of the workforce is part of the open talent. People don't want to work for regular companies. So I think that's really an important point to keep in mind. And it actually challenges a little bit your concept of digital fluency by focusing only on technology and business, because the third component that's missing there, and perhaps implied in the term business, is the focus on the consumer and the stakeholders, because without them, you won't really have it. So it's really, you should look at this almost like a Venn diagram of the three areas: technology, the traditional organization, and then the stakeholders, especially with the consumer, the changing consumers. And the three of them really have the implication then to what Nitin was talking about, the business outcome that should include now the outcome in terms of impact on all the stakeholders and impact on society.
Yeah, I think that drives a lot of the conversation forward, and I think we've got time for a good question here before we wrap up. And this is, you can answer this as well, Jerry, because it's in the same sort of mentality as what you were talking about. Is how do we actually use this crisis well? Like okay, we all had to do a little bit of transformation just to operate in this environment, but it's just a little bit, right? How can we continue to evolve beyond this and make this much more positively endemic in how we do business beyond COVID, where we will have needs for meeting people, needs for not meeting people, using digital a lot more than we had, and continue with this mindset of constantly innovating and thinking about things differently. How do we keep that going beyond, when we're all going to be vaccinated, touch wood, in a few months' time, and even seeing each other again at some point. But how do we keep this mood of transformation moving forward and not drifting back into the lethargy of pre-COVID? I mean, I'm an analyst. I was bored out of my mind last year. And I'm actually while I hate what's happening in the world, it's actually very exciting to see the transformation. So how do we keep that transformation moving after the burning platform starts to smolder and die out a bit? So.
Well, first of all, we have to realize that the crisis is not only the pandemic. We're dealing with a combined crisis of the pandemic, the economic impact, the climate crisis that's coming, the social unrest, and recently, especially in the US, also the ideological divide that we have. So we're dealing with multiple crises that are going to continue. So the state of crisis is going to continue. It's not ending once we kind of basically are immune and we don't have to worry so much about the pandemic, because eventually in a year or two will be another pandemic coming up there. I think the challenge for us is to realize that these changes require a challenging and changing of the current mental models we have. Given the experience we had, the success in work from home, the success in telemarketing, telemedicine, the success in the shift to e-commerce, the successful universities are moving toward e-learning, no one can ignore these impacts. You cannot just go back and forget this experience. So we have to rethink. We're dealing with a new reality. Going back to the pre-crisis situation is unacceptable. So we have to rethink. And the example before, you were talking about the restaurants, just think about, and the sales force, in a sense, moving only to digital. There are wonderful creative combinations now where people are sending their prospective clients dinner or drinks and create a Zoom drink or Zoom dinner with them and continue the interaction. So I think the role here is for really realizing the trends are there. We just had McKinsey came with an assessment that the development in e-commerce were so fast that in few months we achieved what would have taken pre-crisis like 10 years to get to this level. And the same applies in every domain that we're dealing with. So to go back doesn't make sense. So what we have to do is we have to realize we have to be creative. We have to identify the opportunities. The 8 principles we suggest in the book definitely suggest specific areas to work on, and then start experimenting. Design small experiments and run with them. If they're successful, scale them up. If they're a failure, kill them and move to another experiment. But if you start adopting the idea of what is the idealized design that I want, where do I want to achieve, what can I be in 5 to 10 years, and start experimenting toward it, you'll be able really to leverage the crisis into huge business opportunities and for the better of all stakeholders and society.
It's a great answer. And then I got a very good question from a mutual friend of mine, Nitin's, a guy called Mahesh. And he's talking a lot about the gig economy. And it wasn't used that effectively moving into this, but I think now there's a need more than ever to use the gig contract economy more aggressively. I mean, I had a team meeting with my marketing team, I think yesterday, and we had like 6 contractors in with 6 staff, and I'm like, wow, it's hard to tell who's actually here permanently versus who's just contracting for us, and does it really matter anymore? But we've been talking about the gig economy for 20, 25 years, Jerry. What do you think it's finally going to really get into gear now, or do you think it's still going to be fits and starts with the economy we're morphing into?
I don't think we have a choice. I think it's there. There's some amazing set of data on over 1,000 experiments with open innovation suggested that the benefit of open innovation compared to traditional companies doing the work has been 4 to 5x faster and 8 to 10x cheaper than doing internal talent. And look at companies such as NASA that have 17,000 people, but they are heavy users of open innovation. They have a network of over 1 million people that are involved in the NASA operation. And if they do it with the talent and with the name that they have that they can attract talent, every company should consider it. But the implications are, what are the type of talents you need internally? You have to focus more on the designers, architects, and the integrators and do everything outside. It's a whole new way of thinking about talent and the business approach to talent. So you have to challenge the current mental models concerning talent and be able to adopt it and benefit from this. But I think it's here to stay. There is a new movement that's starting, which is the future of work. And I think we'll see significant impact on the traditional definition of what organization is. Because is NASA 17,000 people or NASA 1 million people network that are orchestrating? And this is huge implication to leadership, because if you're leading a network of organizations like this, the key for leadership is how do you create a win-win orientation to everyone involved? There's no longer the old kind of leadership pattern. So I think I see it's here and growing, and I think every company that wants to succeed and survive and grow will have to adopt it.
Thank you, Joe. I'm with you on so much of that. So let's get before I'm going to Nitin to wrap up. Let's get one takeaway everyone's taken from today's conversation that they'll implement into their own work environment when they get back to the office at some point. Maybe Baroness Verma, one takeaway from today that really rings true for you that you may then share with your colleagues.
Thank you, Phil. My takeaway is that we can't stand still. There are huge lessons that we've learned from this crisis, and actually we could make it so much better for all of us if we learn very, very quickly that things that we've adapted and taken into account of well-being as well as productivity fitting hand in hand. So blending is what I want to try and look at better. How do I blend the work life of people that work for me?
Very good, blending. I like that one. Richard, one thing that is prominent in your mind you're going to walk away from?
Thanks, Phil. And the shame you're restricted to one, because this has generated a lot. But I think the one big takeaway for me is we really do need to recalibrate our relationship, not just with our workforce, our stakeholders, but also society coming out of this pandemic.
Very, very poignant. And Jerry, one big takeaway that sticks in your mind?
Have the courage to challenge and change your mental models and to experiment. But courage is key. If you're basically just continuing with the kind of what the old world, you will not succeed. You have to have the courage to do it.
Thank you. And then Nitin, if you'd like to give us your most prominent takeaway and then maybe wrap up for us.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I think for me, the big takeaway, especially coming out of this session, and of course, it's been evident for a while, is sometimes we have to create a crisis. So even though we get out of the current crisis, how do we keep this constant sense of urgency? And I think as leaders, we have to sometimes find the right crisis to create for us to actually spark the next change, so we don't get away from this mode and get into a comfort zone again. So I think hopefully the book gives you a good set of principles to follow and adapt. Please feel free to download a copy or get a physical one. Really thank you to everybody who made this happen. Baroness Verma, really appreciate your guidance and your comments. Thank you, Richard, for being here. Thank you, Phil, for hosting this. And I know the Zoom fatigue sets in, but I think you really were very generous with your time. And last but not the least, thank you, Jerry, for being the guiding light and for encouraging us to think about this bold project of actually getting the book done. So really appreciate it. I learned a lot from you. Not just about how to write a book, but about myself. With that, thank you, everybody. Really glad we could make this happen. And have a good weekend.
Thank you, everyone.